Hey everyone, welcome to this Customer Growth Thought Leadership Series. I'm Tash, VP of Customer Growth at Hup, and I have a very special guest on today to talk all about MEDDICC, Ollie Sharpe, CRO at Trumpet. Welcome, Ollie. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Tash. It's lovely to see you again. Thank you for
Yeah,
inviting me.
always. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your role at Trumpet to begin with.
So I'm CRO. Trumpet is a digital sell-through, digital workspace, lots of different names for it. I manage the revenue organization here. And came here, I was an advisor to them for 18 months, and then I joined them February this year to grow them. Now we're expanding in the US, etc. And yeah, loving my role.
Nice. And I know all too well that you've been responsible for customer success in roles before. Maybe tell us a little bit about your view, your perception on the value of customer success and what it brings to an organization.
To me, I think that customer success is a little bit like RevOps. When you get a good CS team, it's amazing the impact they can have. And I think there's so many nuances, and I will be honest, I learned a lot of this from you. So we've worked together for a long time. So I've learned a lot from you as a CS leader. And I think that it's when you get the good CS leader and the good CS team, the impact not only on the NRR, but the company as a whole is huge. And it's no longer it moves for, and that's it's like RevOps. When you've got a certain type of RevOps team, they're just support, they're just
Mm.
reactive. And a CS team can be seen as just a training team. But when positioned properly, when run properly, and when having the right mindset, the impact of those, it's a massive impact. And it even impacts sales, because even though the customer journey goes sales CS, but all the great stories you get around value when you're doing it in the right way rather than just a training team is unbelievable. It helps the sales team and then helps marketing with the stories. So to me, CS is vital. And I think that it's when companies view them in the wrong way, use them in the wrong way, it's ridiculous. It's just a waste. And I think they're brilliant to work with when you have a good team.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Well, we're talking about MEDDICC today, and MEDDICC specifically for customer success teams. In my experience, there aren't a ton of CS teams leveraging MEDDICC right now. Why do you think that that is?
I think that MEDDICC has always been seen as purely a sales qualification sort of thing. And but I think Andy White of MEDDICC, the actual courses, they do around 40% of their business comes from their clients also putting CS on their courses. And I fully agree. Yeah, I fully agree with this because it is. Going back to the question, I think the problem is purely seen as a qualification framework. It's not. It's something that covers your whole customer life cycle.
Mm.
And on top of that, it's also a common language. It's a value framework with a common language that covers your customer life cycle, is what it should be seen like. And just the pigeonhole it in this sales side, I think, is the wrong thing. And as I said earlier, when you work CS and AEs together closely with the same language, with the same processes, etc., it has a massive impact.
Mm.
But I just don't think it's seen like that. And I think you've also got to acknowledge there is so many different CS terminology, so not terms
Totally, yeah.
or teams. Some of them, if you've got, it depends whether you've got account managers working with you, renewals managers, or sometimes CS are responsible for renewals, upsells, etc. So they are sales in some companies, they're not sales in others, but I disagree that they're not sales in any way because they impact sales. So I think there's lots of reasons, but I do wholeheartedly think that CS teams would really benefit, not from being salespeople, but from understanding a very well structured framework for driving value.
What do you think those benefits could be if a CS team was to adopt MEDDICC?
If you're responsible for NRR and renewals, I think it's going to definitely help that. I do think that a lot of the time CS get pushed down and, oh, you're the people doing the training. And I think that comes down to how CS position themselves, but also how you are viewed by prospects a lot of the time and customers, because that's how they probably use their CS team. So I think what it can do is keep you at what I would call on the line or above the line, as in talking more the strategic conversations. I think it can do that and be a lot more in control of the relationships. The biggest thing for me is in MEDDICC, when we talk about metrics, you have M1s, M2s, M3s, and I can explain those if needed. But those metrics are the things that the company, your prospect, has said that they want to work on to show success in your tool. Surely the most important thing for you to do is go, okay, well, let's take those metrics and let's make sure we are working towards those. On top of that, if you understand the pain and how the implications of the pain, you're still keeping this above the line conversation that matters to the business rather than being pushed down. So I think the benefits of it are huge across nearly every letter.
Amazing. And we're not going to go through what every letter or every component means today in detail, but for you, which do you think are the most important for customer success to focus on?
Well, I think that rather than looking at them as letters, I think it's easier to bunch them into three areas, because what you have is you have the value side of it, which is your metrics, pain, and decision criteria. Let's bunch those together. Out of those, your metrics are what impacts the pain that they're going to have. So it's interesting to understand them. But I think that for me, the most important part of that for the business is your metrics, because what the structure that we use is you have N1s, which is I go to a company and they say, we have a problem with win rates. Okay. And I say, oh, X company had the same problem and they used Trumpet and they got to X% win rate. That is an M1 because it's another company. Then I say, what are your win rates? What are your problems, etc. That's an M2. Then when I close it, that goes over to CS. And what happens is that's their goal. That's what they've got to work with the customer to achieve those metrics. So they turn to what you'd call an M3, which is your goals, value needed to achieve. And guess what? When you hit them, they become someone else's M1. And that's the circle of metrics that I think is very important with that common language. If they understand the decision criteria and the pain, great. But those metrics are what is the center of the relationship. So to me, that is the one I would call out that I think people should really understand.
Amazing. And so you've started to talk a little bit there about how CS teams can leverage the framework to drive value, to show value back, and of course, how that loops into the full life cycle. And it sounds like metrics is a massive part of that. Like your M1s, M2s, M3s then become what goes into your success plan, what you should be driving towards. Where does pain fit into this for a CSM? How should they think about understanding that and leveraging that?
So yeah, because pain really is at three levels. You identify it, you quantify it, you implicate it, and that's how the MEDDICC works. So identifying it is the pain is that the win rate is low because they can't do X, Y, and Z. That's the problem that your tool will solve as a CS2. And then you quantify it to see, okay, well, what is your win rate? What does it need to be? And by implicating it, you're actually saying that if you don't actually change this win rate, what happens to the business? How big is this problem to your business? What happens with that if a CS person understands that? And that's why the handover is so important from AE to CS, which most companies is broken. Let's be honest.
Yep.
That AEs need to take time to hand it over and say, this is the pain that they currently have. This is the implications of that pain and the quantification. And this is how the metrics tie in. Because metrics tie into pain. They are literally above the line, etc. So that helps the CS person keep those more senior relationships, I believe. If they're still talking about, yeah, well, our tool does X, Y, and Z, and come out of that world and say, we need to hit these metrics, because if we don't, your company is going to not hit rich IPO, whatever that implication is. That's all joint. And that's why the value side to me is just one big space that we should understand the whole lot.
And I think what's really interesting for the post-sales teams in particular is you're going to have so many conversations time and time again, or you should, about metrics and about pain. It's not just oh, now I understand the pain, I understand the metrics. That's job done for their 3 years or 5 years that they're with us. Like, this should be constantly talked about and constantly qualified, right?
100%. And what happens is you get pushed down. I think normally the champion is sort of on the line, I would say. I mean, above the line to me is strategic, below the line operational. It comes from Skip Miller's book. But I think that you need to keep those conversations going, or you do get pushed down. So it's constant. How are we doing against these metrics that's going to help you achieve your goal? 100%. But as we say, it all comes down to the handover. Does it happen properly in the handover?
That's a whole other 30-minute conversation, that.
Use 30 minutes. And it's not even that.
You started to touch a little bit there on the impact of MEDDICC on like relationships and how high or how senior a CSM is operating in an organization. Can we talk about that a little bit more? What are some of the other elements of MEDDICC that play into that?
So the economic buyer and champion. Now, MEDDICC is all linked, and this is why people that use MEDDICC as a tick box exercise, I don't agree with. I think it's the biggest common mistake that companies do. And there's so many people go, "Yeah, we use MEDDICC," and you ask them two questions, go, "You don't use MEDDICC properly." So, economic buyer and champion, really important. Your champion is the person that is on your side, etc. It's probably the person that CS are continuing that relationship with. Hopefully, they can keep that. Economic buyer is the person that is actually signing the document or category budget holder. They're very important, but it's things like understanding that they may have different metrics and different pain points across those. So yes, it all ties together, but I believe so many times you get that CS get pushed down when a rep has engaged with a champion or maybe hopefully an EB. But it's keeping those engaged, but you can only keep them engaged if you're having the right kind of conversation. John McMahon talks about being high up in the tree. It uses a different language, and you've got to use their language. And I do think there's different. One thing I would advise to any company with CS: enable your CS team to speak at a strategic level. Because I think that is so impactful that they can sit around a table and start talking about, well, your goal was to actually impact your EBITDA or whatever that above the line conversation is. That keeps the champion, and definitely, I mean, it helps you build a champion even further because they're having the impact, but to keep the EB engaged. And if you can do that, your renewal is safe, and your NRR, you're having the biggest impact you can on the company. So that would be one of my biggest things, to make sure your CS team can talk at that strategic level. And read John McMahon's book, it talks all about it.
And I like what you said about everything being linked. So it's understanding what are the metrics that the EB cares about? What are the metrics that my champion cares about? How do I show that value story back to each of the different levels? I think bringing it back to the handover piece, this is where it gets a little bit interesting for CS, is understanding who that champion was during the sales cycle, and then how you leverage that champion. Is it still the same champion post-sales? And I think a lot of CS teams look at the person who is responsible for project managing the rollout of the solution, or the person who's responsible for administrating the solution. And they're like, oh, that's my champion. But no, it's not. Like, it's not always the right person. And so aside from in the sales handover, and of course this should be talked about as part of the sales handover, who was the champion, how did you leverage them, what do they care about? How else would you spot a champion? If you're a CSM, you've not really thought about this, how do you figure out who they are?
I think it's somebody that with an invested interest in the success of what you're doing. And that can be a number of people. Because I mean, a rep can have, an IC can have invested interest, and there's no harm in seeing champions at different levels. And you can call them a champion. It's just you don't tend to have one key champion that's going to take whatever you need to the EB. But the way we talk about it is you may have a champion that gets you to your true champion, because they're not a coach. They're selling for you internally. They have power and influence, just not enough, but you see them as a stepping ladder to get there. But it's things like in our MEDDICC deal sheet, we have what's the personal win for the champion. And that's really important. And a salesperson should be trained how to test a champion. Are they selling for us internally? How do we know that? Can we check that? But even knowing their personal win, I think that's important, because if you go in, you find your champion, and they know that if the rollout of this drives a key metric, that means they will probably get a promotion. Perfect. And that's your conversation you should be having with that. So yeah, testing their power, their influence. Are they selling for you when you're not in the room? All of those kind of things is how to test them. But you've got to check the power and influence. There's too many people are, oh, they're really nice to me. And that's not a champion. That's just a nice person.
And I think when you think about it, a lot of what customer success struggles with is, who is the person driving accountability in the organization? You're trying as a CSM to drive adoption of your platform, to get people using different bits and pieces because you want to show value. And sometimes that's a real struggle to do. And so this is where it brings it back to the value of that champion and understanding the personal win, like you said, because if you understand what they're trying to get to, you can then leverage that person to drive what you're trying to drive within that company.
100%, especially if they've sort of gone out of their way to bring this in, because they've
Mm.
probably had a fight, say, yeah, no, we need this. This is on me. So if you have a problem and that engagement where you get pushed down to someone rolling out the project and you lose your champion, if they're not doing what you need and driving the usage, then where do you go to? It's hard to
Mm.
go back to that champion. So I think, and that's really important. And we also, within MEDDICC, what most companies use is 3 whys and value pyramid. Value pyramid is very much about, okay, what's the company goal? What's the initiatives, the strategies underneath, etc. And as long as you have that North Star that we talked about with the implication of pain, you can go back, hold on, you've invested money in this tool and the people aren't using it. The reason why you invested it because you have a problem with your win rates, which is not, meaning you may not hit your IPO. This is important. Let's drive this back, whether in partnership. And it brings back that partnership, but it brings a strategic partnership rather than an operational partnership. And that's what's important.
I love it. Well, the two bits that we've talked about so far, so driving value, managing relationships, and helping you stay high enough in customers. Obviously, the end goal here is that you're impacting on revenue, you're closing your renewals, you're closing your upsell. Is there anything that you would mention for a CSM in terms of like decision process and how that plays in as a factor to that piece?
Yeah, I think, and I've worked with renewal teams, CSAs, etc. And I think sometimes it's just, we do like ostriches, we bury our heads and go, oh, well, hopefully they're just happy with the tool. And I think it's easily done. Whereas I think it is, the decision process will tend to be very, very different for a renewal. Very different. I mean, they're not investing in a new tool. Hopefully they're not. But I do think it's a conversation worth having. Our renewal comes up in December. What is the process that you need to go through and who is involved in that process for you to know that this is something that you're going to renew? I mean, really, how many times do we get screwed over at the end where we go, I didn't know they were talking to a competitor, and then there's some churn comes out of nowhere? I mean, it shouldn't happen because you're aligning with the metrics and the pain, but you should still have this conversation. If you think of the best account managers, the best CS, they're the ones that you can sit down and they go, yes, we're hitting our strategic goal and we've started conversations with the renewal. We've got procurement involved. We've got these involved. They're the ones that you go, okay, you're on top of this. And that decision process, it's not that hand over the decision process from the AEs. You can do because it's good for awareness, but training CS or whoever's managing the renewal, how to manage a decision process is a good thing. And maybe the paper process, but I think it's going to be less. You don't need the contracts, but decision process, it's going to be different, but just know how to manage it and what the steps are. We used Rapid framework before. We used it at LinkedIn together. Yeah. I think that's always good. It's a Bain structure, as recommender, approver, etc. But yeah, the decision process is very key because if you don't cover it, you'll be surprised at some deals churning that you didn't know about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think asking about that process early enough in the contract life cycle, right? So you're not bunched up at the end. And also asking your champion or whoever you're working with internally what they know about the decision process, because we can't assume that they always know how to get the renewal done or how to get the upsell done. And so I think asking the right questions.
I think that if you're talking at the right level and you're having QBRs where you're bringing in your champion, whether you need the EB in there or not, but you're having those QBRs bringing in the champion saying, well, these are the metrics that we were looking to do because this is a reminder of the pain we were solving. We've been hitting those. What do we now need to do in order to make sure that the renewal goes through on time because it is this date? That's a great conversation to have.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, we're almost at time. I have one last question to wrap it up. You mentioned earlier one of the ways you can tell, you can ask a couple of questions and oh, are you really using MEDDICC? Are you not using MEDDICC? Is it just a tick box exercise? How do you avoid it becoming a tick box exercise? How do you properly embed it in a business?
Yeah, I mean, I've read Andy's book a few times, John McMahon's book a few times, been on Andy's course, etc., a couple of times, and I think it is just it's having it as a common language, and it isn't just this tick box because for every letter there's a journey within every letter, and there's a connection between every letter. So it's like talking about pain. Yeah, I know the pain. That is a tick box exercise. but it's not. It's have you identified the pain? The next step is how do you quantify it? So do you know actually the impact of doing that with numbers? And can you then implicate it, and have you aligned that with your champion, and is the EB aware of it? So you've got a whole journey within one letter, and that happens within most letters. So that's the difference. And I think you can put it into your CRM, but don't have tick boxes. And it has to be a common language throughout. I have 3 levels of MEDDICC deal sheet that I use. One for 40K plus, one for 20 to 40, and one for under 20. All different levels, all measure, and all of them take each letter on a journey. And it's just embedded in everything we do and every bit of language we use. And that's the difference.
Amazing. Well, Ollie, thanks so much. You've been a superstar as always. Loads of good advice for CS teams, and we massively appreciate it. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to see you again.